Frogs with extra body parts started popping up all over North America in the 90s, legs growing out of faces and eyes in weird places. But why? In 2023, researchers in Western Australia found a blue, magnificent tree frog, so rare that even frog experts said they'd never seen anything like it. And in Florida, a two-headed snake was dragged into someone's home by their cat. These are disturbing mutations discovered in nature scientists want to forget. In April of 2023, Australian farmers at a small hobby farm in Queensland noticed one of their hens had not two, not three, but 4 legs. 2 extra limbs dangled awkwardly from her rear end. Now, what's really interesting about this case is that the other chickens noticed this, and they did not like it. They bullied her. They pecked at the extra legs, pecked so hard that feathers fell out and a wound formed. The chicken had polymorphia, a rare birth defect where extra limbs form, usually when an embryo starts as a twin and then reabsorbs but leaves parts behind. And looking at this chicken, you can see that these are full legs. They're not just these little stumps that barely look like legs, they're functional. A local farmer eventually rehomed the 4-legged hen to someone willing to take care of her separately, otherwise the rest of the flock would have tormented her, probably to death. In the late 90s, people started finding frogs with freakish mutations all across North America, like legs growing out of their faces or 2 extra limbs near their chest. One kid in Minnesota came across a 5-legged bullfrog in 1996, and stories kept rolling in from states like Wisconsin and even into Quebec, Canada. It wasn't a cartoonish anomaly. These deformities were very real. There were misshapen eyes as well, appendages sprouting in weird spots, and sometimes even had mixed reproductive bits. Researchers weren't sure what was going on here, but eventually they landed on this messy cocktail of causes. Parasites burrowing into tadpoles, chemicals seeping into ponds, UV light messing with embryos, and just predators biting off limbs that then regrew in wonky ways. They called it a sign something was going wrong with the environment. Over time, they narrowed it down to 4 main issues, but no single culprit explains every case. These frogs are still popping up today, just thankfully not in huge numbers, but every once in a while someone pulls a limbless tadpole or a frog with an eye in its shoulder out of a pond. In 2020, a homeowner in Florida was surprised when her daughter brought a tiny snake into the house. The cat had caught it. Small, but it still shocked her because it had 2 fully formed heads on its body, each head moving independently with its own tongue, eyes, even competing for control when they ate. Wildlife officials named him Doss and said it was a southern black racer. This kind of mutation, called bicephaly, happens when an embryo splits and then stops, basically creating an identical twin that doesn't fully separate. The snake was taken in by Florida fish and wildlife experts who said this snake could survive in human care, but that chances in nature would be slim. Snakes like this can't dodge predators as easy, they can't grab food as easy, they can't even agree with each other. One head might go left, the other wants to go right. It's just an absolute nightmare. So while a 2-headed snake sounds pretty dangerous, you'd actually have an easier time dealing with 2 heads than 1. Next up is the Dracula fish, a tiny see-through freshwater fish discovered in Myanmar in 2007. It's just 1.7 centimeters long. The males have these creepy fang-like bones protruding from their jaws. Not scales or teeth, but actual bone structures that jut out in front like vampire fangs. Scientists say billions of years ago, its ancestors lost real teeth, but this lineage reversed course and grew bone fangs again. Evolution in reverse. Pretty cool. These fangs are used by males in fights. They jab at each other in territorial squabbles. The fish is translucent, almost larva-like, and has far fewer bones than normal fish. Most of its body is cartilage, which just makes its fangs stand out even more. Scientists still don't know how or why this exact setup came about. Fangs regrowing in a species millions of years after losing them is pretty wild, and since it's only been found in one small stream, it's just kind of a freak show of nature that may never exist anywhere else. Now, right next to the Chernobyl plant is a place called the Red Forest, and it got that name for a pretty grim reason. When Reactor 4 exploded, it sent a radioactive cloud directly over this patch of forest, and within hours, the pine trees turned a weird rust red color. Basically, they died almost instantly from radiation exposure. That entire section of forest just collapsed. But over the years, new trees started growing again. Not quite like before though. Scientists have found trees with bizarre growth patterns. Some have twisted trunks, stunted branches, or grow at strange angles. A few have odd discolorations or split limbs that don't match normal growth cycles. Even now, decades later, radiation levels in the Red Forest are some of the highest in the whole exclusion zone. The forest acts like a sponge, so any rain that soaks into the soil can stir up radioactive particles again. Now, beside the massive catfish in the cooling ponds near Chernobyl, smaller fish in the rivers and lakes around Pripyat have shown some pretty unsettling traits. Researchers have talked about fish with physical deformities like missing eyes, bulging growths coming out of them, or just oddly shaped in general. The radiation that poured into the nearby waterways didn't just disappear, it seeped into the water, settling in the silt and got into the food chain. Small aquatic creatures absorbed it, and the fish that ate them absorbed even more. That kind of exposure messes with how cells divide and grow, and that's how you end up with fish that look like Blinky from The Simpsons. And then there are all the issues you can't see with the naked eye. Some fish are born sterile, others just don't live as long as they should, but there are still plenty swimming around. The strange thing is that some species have adapted better than others. Mutations don't always kill them off right away, they just make the fish look off. So while they might not be glowing like in cartoons, they're definitely not normal. This is one of the darkest and hardest to talk about. After the explosion, over 600,000 people were called in to help contain the disaster. These weren't all volunteers. Many were soldiers, firefighters, and regular workers who didn't fully understand how dangerous the job was. They were called liquidators, and their job was to clean up the mess, build the sarcophagus over the reactor, and stop the radiation from spreading. There's tons of footage and photographs of these people working away in Chernobyl, completely unaware of how the radiation would affect them later on. A lot of them went in without proper protection too, some with just a cloth mask or nothing at all, and the effects were brutal. Radiation burns, organ failure, thyroid cancer, and in some cases death within mere days. Some liquidators were exposed to such high doses that their bodies literally started breaking down on a cellular level. Some survivors lived for years afterward, but a lot of them did deal with long-term health issues like tumors, birth defects in their children, bone diseases. There are stories of liquidators who ended up completely isolated, physically and emotionally wrecked from what they experienced. So when people talk about mutations, it's not just fish and frogs, it's human lives that were permanently altered. After the Chernobyl disaster, everyone had to evacuate. Of course, that meant most pets, especially dogs, got left behind. While in the decades since, those abandoned pets have multiplied into entire packs of wild dogs living in and around the exclusion zone. A recent study from the University of South Carolina and the National Human Genome Research Institute looked into 302 of these dogs. The goal is to see how radiation may have affected them over generations, and it turns out that these dogs aren't just surviving, they might actually be doing pretty well. Unlike bees and some other animals that seem to struggle with reproduction in the area, the dogs are doing just fine. They're reproducing normally, raising litters, roaming free. Scientists believe they may have developed some kind of resistance to the radiation. There's even early evidence showing they're less prone to cancer. Now, we're not saying they're invincible, obviously, but if these dogs really have adapted to these high levels of radiation, that could mean their biology is changing to handle one of the deadliest threats on Earth. It's still early days in the research, but it's enough to make you stop and think. Somehow, these animals have managed to carve out a life in one of the most hostile places on the planet, and that is pretty nuts. If you want straight up visible proof of mutation from Chernobyl, check out the firebugs. These little red and black bugs are normally easy to spot because they have a really distinct pattern. But in the exclusion zone, researchers started finding ones that looked all kinds of messed up. Patterns were totally off. Some bugs had their markings in the wrong spots, others were missing parts altogether. Scientists Timothy Mousseau and Anders Moller actually did a study and found that the bugs living closer to the reactor were way more likely to have these deformities. They photographed tons of them and compared them to firebugs from outside the zone, and yeah, the difference is obvious. It's not the most dramatic mutation you'll ever see, but it's one of the clearest cases that got caught on camera.
There are still crazy things going on in Chernobyl to this day, decades after the explosion of the reactor at the nuclear power plant in April 1986. Now, animals and nature have rightfully been affected in a big way. According to a study that began in 1991, the organisms responsible for decomposition and replenishing organic matter back into the ecosystem, such as insects, fungi, and microbes, are presenting symptoms of radioactive contamination, which isn't too shocking, but still isn't good. One of the most prominent areas of this effect has been called the Bloody Red Forest. It's a set of woodland where all the pine trees turned a blood red color right after the meltdown, and then died not long after. Now, it's pretty, don't get me wrong, but it's completely unnatural and has caused some issues. Now, 15 to 20 years after they were exposed to radiation and died, these trees were not decaying, when at this point, normal trees would be long gone. Due to this, scientists decided to run some tests by filling specially prepared garbage bags with leaf litter from uncontaminated areas, making sure there were no insects or decomposers present, and then leaving the bags out in both contaminated and uncontaminated wooded areas in the exclusion zone for nearly a year to check the decomposition rates of the leaves. Now, bags left in uncontaminated areas were as expected, with normal rates of decomposition between 70 to 90% of the leaves decomposing. But the leaves in contaminated areas retained 60% of their original weight, indicating much less activity by natural decomposers. Now, this suggests that the radiation exposure has a detrimental effect on the ability of the Chernobyl ecosystem to replenish itself with nutrients, which could be causing the stunting of tree growth that has been recorded. But with this comes another problem. The leaves in contaminated areas stayed intact and dry even after almost a year, and this could present a fire hazard, which in turn presents a danger of radioactive contaminants being spread outside the exclusion zone by forest fires. So that is scary and just not good at all. Then there's how this affected all the animals. According to a 2011 study in Biological Conservation, Chernobyl caused genetic mutations in plants and animals increased by a factor of 20. Among breeding birds in that region, rare species suffered disproportionate effects from the explosion's radiation compared to common species. Now, further research is needed to understand how the increased mutations affect species' reproductive rates, population size, genetic diversity, and other survival factors, but it definitely affected animals in a negative way. In 2016, a study found that the eastern tree frogs in the Chernobyl exclusion zone exhibited different characteristics than their neighboring cousins, and in 2023, another study discovered distinct genetic differences between Chernobyl dogs and dogs living only 10 miles away in Chernobyl City. Now, not all the animals living around Chernobyl are entirely wild, as there are around 900 stray dogs, mostly descended from those left behind when people evacuated the area. Veterinarians, radiation experts, and volunteers from a group called the Dogs of Chernobyl captured the dogs, vaccinated them against diseases, and tagged them. Now, in addition to the tags, some dogs are fitted with radiation detector collars. Now, the dogs offer a way to map radiation across the Chernobyl exclusion zone and study the ongoing effects of the accident. While scientists generally can't get a close look at individual wild animals in the zone, they can monitor the dogs closely, and they are, of course, radioactive. Visitors to the area are advised to avoid petting the dogs to minimize radiation exposure, no matter how cute they are. Now, these dogs have increased rates of cataracts because the eyes are the first tissues to show signs of chronic exposure to ionizing radiation. Now, not all is lost on these dogs though, as the unique genetic diversity of these dogs makes them ideal candidates for future studies, seeking to understand the long-term genetic health effects of highly radioactive environments on populations of large mammals mammals, especially in understanding the biological underpinnings of human survival in regions of high and continuous environmental assault, the researchers said. So, I guess that's a plus. Then there's the birds. While there are plenty of them in the Chernobyl exclusion zone, 489 different species to be exact, they are examples of animals that still face problems from radiation exposure. A study of barn swallows from 1991 to 2006 indicated birds in the exclusion zone displayed more abnormalities than birds from a controlled sample, including deformed beaks, albinistic feathers, bent tail feathers, and deformed air sacs. Now, birds in the zone had less reproductive success, and these birds often had smaller brains, malformed sperm, and cataracts, presumably as a result of radiation-related genetic mutations. Now, if you are already scared of spiders, these ones will freak you out even more. The spiders here are radioactive as they build their webs to catch their prey. They add to the dangerous environment of the forest. These webs are not like normal spider webs. In fact, they are woven in abstract ways that suggest genetic mutation is at hand. Now, they're also highly radioactive themselves, making them a danger for any non-radioactive animal to touch. Now, who knew spiders could get 100 times scarier?
In September of 2024, a farm in Kentucky welcomed a calf that looked like some sort of bizarre Frankenstein creation. It had two fully formed heads on one body. Each had its own eyes, snout, and neck, but they shared a single body and internal organs like a heart and lungs. The little calf also had other issues: a cleft palate, twisted spine, underdeveloped rectum, and weird jointed legs. Farmers said the odds of something like this happening are around 1 in 400 million. I'm not sure how they find that number, but apparently that's the case. And unfortunately, the calf didn't make it past its first day. Honestly, as bad as this might sound, I think that's a good thing. I mean, not only would it have had a poor quality of life, but you really want to see this thing walking around. Casey Tarter, one of the farmers, is also an agricultural student at Western Kentucky University. She mentioned the two-headed calf in class, saying they decided to use it as a learning opportunity. They took detailed photos, they examined its oddly fused organs, and used the data to teach about developmental issues in mammals. In March of 2018 in Shangjing, China, a farmer found a calf with 6 legs. There were 2 normal legs at the front and then 4 weirdly dangling limbs from its belly. The calf had trouble moving because of the extra limbs, but other than that, it was doing okay and quickly became a local attraction. People from the area started visiting the farm just to take pictures with the calf. This isn't the first time something like this happened in China. Back in 2014, another 6-legged cow was born in Shandong. This one had 2 extra legs growing out of its neck. The farmer Zhang Gongjun, who helped deliver the calf, said, "I've raised the mother for 5 years and seen her through 4 births, and I've never seen anything like this before." Once his friends shared photos of the cow online, people started showing up. Zhang said, "I get crowds of people here every day and all kinds of camera crews from TV stations." According to a 2002 study, cases like this are very rare. Only around 4 in every 100,000 cattle are born with extra limbs. In August of 2019, an angler named Debbie Geddes pulled a trout out of Lake Champlain, which had 2 mouths, one where it should be and another just below it. Her photo went viral, with people calling it the catch of a lifetime. But scientists don't actually think this was a genetic mutation. They think it could have been caused by an injury that healed oddly, creating what looks like a second mouth. One researcher from Harvard said this sort of deformity can happen when soft tissues heal in strange ways, not because of DNA changes. But that's just one theory. Nobody really knows what the deal was with this fish. Geddes released it back into the water. In October of 2021, a rare 2-headed turtle, later named Mary Kate and Ashley, hatched in Cape Cod, Massachusetts. It was a diamondback terrapin that hatched with a rare condition that caused it to have 2 heads and 6 legs, all sharing one shell. Birdseye Cape Wildlife Center posted a photo of it on Facebook, along with the caption, "This is a condition called bicephaly. It's a rare anomaly that can occur from both genetic and environmental factors that influence an embryo during development." Even though animals with this condition usually don't make it very long, the staff felt pretty hopeful. The turtles continued to be, quote, bright and active, and were eating, swimming, and gaining weight each day. Mary Kate and Ashley were discovered in a protected nesting spot. Researchers noticed that while they shared a shell, they each had their own spine and digestive system and seemed to team up to move around. In 2023, during heavy monsoon rains in India, farmers found a 5-foot albino cobra slithering through their home. Unlike some pale snakes though, this one lacked the dark pigmentation entirely, so it actually kind of glowed pale pink in the rain. Albino cobras are almost unheard of because without pigment, their skin is very sensitive to sun and their vision usually suffers. This snake was venomous, fully grown, yet somehow it managed to avoid predators and humans until it found shelter in this person's home. Wildlife rescue teams safely captured it, and the cobra was taken to a wildlife rehabilitation center, where vets said its survival was slim but improved with care. But while albino animals pop up here and there, an adult albino venomous snake is shockingly rare, apparently. In 2023, conservationists in Western Australia came across this bright blue frog with white spots, totally different from your average green tree frog. Field researchers at night heard some rustling and wandered over to see it perched near the workshop. The frog lacked the yellow pigment thanks to a genetic mutation, leaving only the blue tone behind. It's so rare that Jody Rowley, a biologist who studied tens of thousands of these frogs, said she'd never seen anything like it in her entire career. Scientists don't know if this blue frog will survive, find a mate, or have a shot at passing its color on, but regardless, it's a reminder that wild genetics can still surprise us. Human-animal hybrid chimeras. That does not sound like a real thing, but it is. Human-animal hybrid chimeras are creatures that combine human and animal cells, resulting in organisms with both human and non-human characteristics. Imagine a being with the body of a pig, but with human brain cells. Crazy, but it does have its upsides when it comes to stem cell research and organ transplantation. But obviously there's some ethical things to consider, and there have been legal restrictions on this kind of research. In the United States, the Human-Animal Chimera Prohibition Act of 2016 was introduced to address some of these concerns. On August 22, 2016, Representative Christopher H. Smith put forth a bill that prohibits creating a human-animal chimera, transferring human embryos into non-human wombs, or vice versa. Penalties could be pretty severe, hefty fines and or imprisonment for up to 10 years. But the bill didn't end up getting passed. Humanzees. These are hypothetical hybrids of humans and chimpanzees. There are rumors and conspiracies about attempts being made to create them, but none have been 100% verified. Doesn't sound all that outlandish to me though. Obviously this type of experiment would be highly unethical, so it would make sense that there would be attempts to cover it up. The first and most infamous attempt to create a human-chimpanzee hybrid was spearheaded by a Soviet biologist, Ilya Ivanov. Ivanov had set out to create a human-chimpanzee hybrid as early as 1910. By the 20s, he was trying to artificially inseminate female chimpanzees to create part human, part chimp offspring. It didn't work, but his next plan was even more ambitious. He wanted to impregnate human women instead, but that's when the government supposedly stepped in and put a halt to his work. Then in the 70s, there was a chimpanzee named Oliver who became a bit famous when rumors started to spread that he might be part human. He had some unusual physical traits, an odd cranial shape, and he had freckles, but a genetic analysis in 1996 revealed that Oliver had the standard 48 chromosomes of a chimpanzee, not the 47 you'd find in a hybrid. So Oliver was just an unusually unique chimp. But stories about human-chimp hybrids don't end there. In 1981, a story came out about a chimpanzee being impregnated by a human in 1967 in China. A man named Ji Yongzheng, the head of the hospital in Shenyang, said that he'd been part of this experiment. According to him, the chimp was successfully impregnated but died from neglect when the Cultural Revolution disrupted the research, and scientists involved were sent away to farm labor. In 2019, there were also reports of a research team led by Professor Juan Carlos Espelza Belmont from the Salk Institute for Biological Studies in California having success with creating human-monkey chimeras. These embryos, which were only allowed to develop for a few weeks, were reportedly created in China to sidestep legal restrictions in the States. They weren't allowed to develop past the early stages in order to avoid more ethical issues. Let's talk about ligers. A liger is a hybrid cross between a male lion and a female tiger. Unlike chimeras, ligers aren't the result of genetic splicing or more complicated science experiments. Instead, this is just straightforward breeding. With that said though, there's still a ton of controversy with this. Ligers are often larger than either parent species thanks to a phenomenon called hybrid vigor. This means they can grow to be enormous, often reaching sizes beyond even the largest lions or tigers, and they can be very strong. But the major issues with ligers is their health. They usually have a whole list of physical problems, like joint issues, organ problems, and a lot of this has to do with their rapid growth and the fact that obviously they're not really supposed to exist. Plus, these things only exist in captivity. Ligers are bred for spectacle. Breeding ligers is legal in many places, but it's heavily scrutinized and of course illegal in others. Glowfish were the first genetically modified pets. They're a zebrafish that glow in the dark. Glowfish were developed in 1999 by scientists who inserted a gene from a jellyfish into a zebrafish. This gene causes the fish to produce a fluorescent protein, making them glow under ultraviolet light. Now, originally these fish were created to help detect environmental pollutants. If the water was contaminated, the fish would change color. But the glowing fish just looked so cool that companies started seeing dollar signs. Legally, glowfish are somewhat of a gray area. They were first marketed in Singapore, where the regulations on GMOs were more lenient. When they were introduced to the United States in 2003, there was a lot of controversy. Some thought they were neat, little nifty novelties. Others had concerns about the ethics of creating genetically modified pets and the impacts they could have on nature if they were to escape into the wild. Glowfish are legal and available to buy in a lot of places, but they're banned or restricted in others. For example, California has specific regulations when it comes to the sale and transport of genetically modified organisms, and glowfish were banned there for a long time. I think they may be legal now though. If anyone's from California in the audience, please let me know.
But that's not the only scary mutated animal there. According to Slate in the early 90s, which was just a few years after the incident, radiation levels in the wild boar that died near Chernobyl were more than 2,000 times what's considered safe. And even today, eating animals from inside the exclusion zone is still pretty hazardous, as a person might be exposed to radiation levels that are dozens of times higher than what's safe. Then in 2016, a video went viral of a catfish swimming around the cooling pond of the Chernobyl power plant. Very few mutations lead to extra large size, explains University of South Carolina radiation specialist Dr. Timothy Masu. Instead, they grow less efficiently, they're less capable of catching food, and they tend to not live as long. Now that's why it's shocking that it's so large, and I would not want to mess with the fish that big. Then, as of 2015, there had been almost 20,000 cases of thyroid cancer reported in people who were exposed at the time of the incident. And approximately 5,000 of these thyroid cancers are likely attributed to them drinking fresh milk containing radioactive iodine from cows that had eaten contaminated grass in the first few weeks following the incident. Yep, you heard that right. The cows created radioactive milk. Now in 2018, it was said that Ukraine still has radioactivity levels up to 5 times the official safe limit, research suggests. Now scientists sampled cow's milk from private farms and homes in the Ravine region, about 125 miles away from the site of the catastrophic explosion. Researchers found levels of radioactive caesium in milk above Ukraine's safe limit for adults of 100 becquerel per liter at 6 of 14 settlements studied. Now the highest levels found were about 500 BQ liter, 5 times over the limit for adults, and more than 12 times that for the young. The study was carried out at the University of Exeter and the Ukrainian Institute of Agricultural Radiology. More than 30 years after the Chernobyl disaster, people are still routinely exposed to radioactive caesium when consuming locally produced staple foods, including milk, in Chernobyl-affected areas in Ukraine, said Dr. Irina Lebunska of University of Exeter. Though the level of soil contamination in the studied areas is not extremely high, radioactive caesium continues to accumulate in milk and other foods. Now this is just one of the lasting effects, which is horrific. On a lighter note though, an endangered wild horse is making a comeback thanks to Chernobyl. The Smithsonian's National Zoo and Conservation Biology Institute called the Przewalski's horses the last truly wild horse. Its once large population that ranged across large areas of Asia and Europe was eventually reduced to almost nothing. When Lee Boyd and Catherine A. Hope edited a book about the animal in 1994. The most recent wild sighting had occurred in the late 60s, leading the authors to declare them extinct in the wild. But British ecologists Mike Wood and Nick Beresford, who specialize in studying the effects of radiation on Chernobyl's wildlife, observed that the Shelvinsky's horses is thriving within the exclusion zone. In the late 1990s, about 30 of these horses were released in the Ukrainian side of the zone, and the population has increased to more than 200. Based on camera trap images, Wood estimated that some of the original horses, identified by their brand markings, are still alive, and photos of juvenile horses also indicate that the population is expanding. And finally, if you didn't know, Earth has both a magnetic field and an atmosphere that protects us from dangerous radiation. Now, NASA knows that astronauts on the International Space Station get exposed to 20 times the radiation we get down here on the planet. So after discovering that a fungus thriving around the heavily radiated Chernobyl disaster site consumes radiation through radiosynthesis, they decided to experiment with it in space, and over the course of a month they found out that the fungus actually blocks radiation literally by eating it. The experiments on the ISS revealed that it was utilizing melanin to transform radioactive gamma rays into chemical energy. Now, this is actually really exciting because this ability may turn out to be useful in future space exploration. NASA is hoping that the fungus may be used to both shield equipment and the crew from deadly radiation during long space flights, and even more importantly, help clean up radioactive waste. Well, that's all for our list of unsettling creatures found in Chernobyl that won't stop growing.
Starting off at our number 10 spot, we have voles. Voles, those tiny furry rodents that look like they could be the star in a Disney movie, have a dark secret in the Chernobyl exclusion zone. They are the victims of their own diet. These creatures love mushrooms, and unfortunately, some mushroom species in the area are excellent at soaking up radiation like sponges. The result? Voles in radioactive hotspots show alarming trends. They're less fertile, their populations are dwindling, and their tiny eyes are developing cataracts at an unnaturally high rate. These symptoms highlight just how deeply radiation works its way through the food chain, showing no mercy even to the smallest forest residents. Next, we are talking about the mutated wolves. Wolves are not just surviving, they're actually thriving in Chernobyl's ghostly forests. Not only this, but they might actually be holding a secret that could help humanity. Studies by a Princeton University team revealed that these predators possess altered immune systems, potentially making them more resistant to cancer. Blood samples showed that their DNA has adapted in very unique ways, allowing them to tolerate the radiation-filled environment. Researchers believe these wolves could offer clues to combat cancer in humans. It's quite the twist of fate that the very landscape that should have destroyed them might have transformed them into something extraordinary. Next, we are talking about swallows. Barn swallows darting through the Chernobyl exclusion zone are more than just survivors of a nuclear disaster. They're carriers of a microscopic phenomenon that defies all logic. Nestled within their bodies are bacteria that have developed an extraordinary resistance to gamma radiation. These bacterial hitchhikers, exposed to generations of radioactive stress, have adapted in ways that turn one of nature's most destructive forces into a manageable environmental factor. Researchers have observed that these bacteria not only survive in high radiation conditions, but they actually thrive, suggesting that the disaster created an evolutionary pressure cooker that selected these near indestructible microbes. These microorganisms are effectively rewriting the rules of survival at the cellular level, raising questions about the adaptability of life in extreme conditions. Could this be a blueprint for how life might evolve in radioactive environments on other planets, or in the aftermath of nuclear catastrophes elsewhere? Next, we are talking about the lynx. The Eurasian lynx, long thought extinct in Europe, has staged a surprising return in Chernobyl's exclusion zone. With humans gone, these elusive cats have reclaimed their territory, thriving in the irradiated forests. While their radioactive exposure is unknown, scientists believe their radiation levels match other other animals inside of the zone. Hundreds now roam the area, a long way from the extinction that people had thought. It is very clear that Chernobyl has shown us the unexpected consequences of a nuclear disaster and how nature has bounced back in ways that no one even thought was possible. These predators have turned Chernobyl into their sanctuary, a radioactive kingdom where humanity no longer rules. In our number 6 spot today, we have the radioactive boars. The wild boars of Chernobyl are spreading. It sounds like a terrifying zombie movie, and honestly, it kind of is. These radioactive animals roam beyond the exclusion zone, mingling with non-radioactive boars, and then sometimes ending up as food for unsuspecting humans. In 2017, a third of wild boars tested in Germany showed radiation levels too dangerous for consumption thanks to their love of radioactive mushrooms. The boar's mobility ensures that Chernobyl's legacy continues to spread far beyond its borders, turning an ordinary forest hunt into a potential brush with disaster.
Przewalski's horses are a rare species. One of the last truly wild horse breeds left on Earth. Native to the steppes of Central Asia, these horses were on the verge of extinction, but there have been a few attempts made to get their population back to a healthy place. In 1998, an experiment took place in the wake of the most disastrous nuclear accident in history, the Chernobyl exclusion zone. The vast area around the Chernobyl nuclear power plant had been evacuated due to radiation and was then transformed into a sort of nature reserve. With only a small handful of humans inhabiting the area, it seemed like the perfect place to release 31 of these endangered horses. Today, these horses have not only survived, but thrived. By 2019, their population in the Chernobyl zone had grown to over 100. And are there some possible negative consequences thanks to radiation? Possibly, but probably better than human tampering. Obviously, considering how rare these horses are and the conservation efforts being made, people aren't allowed to mess with these horses. Unfortunately though, poaching has been an issue and it's taken a bit of a toll on their numbers. Alright, next up is genetically modified salmon, produced by a company called Aqua Bounty Technologies. Now, this one is different from others on the list because there aren't restrictions on them, but there really should be, and I'll explain why. So these are the first genetically modified salmon approved by the FDA for commercial production and consumption. Aqua Bounty Technologies took genes from 2 other fish, Pacific Chinook salmon and the ocean pout, and inserted them into the Atlantic salmon's DNA. But why? Well, the goal was to create salmon that grow about twice as fast as regular salmon do. Instead of just growing seasonally like natural salmon, these guys grow all year round. So they're available on your plate all the time. Very convenient, but not everyone is on board with this. One big worry is what might happen if these GM salmon were to escape into the wild. Even though the FDA insists that this is not a concern because the salmon are raised in controlled environments and are sterile females that can't even produce anyway, a lot of people just don't want to eat genetically modified food. Well, alright, big deal, just don't buy them then. Well, that's the issue. The Aqua Advantage salmon doesn't have to be labeled as genetically modified because according to the FDA, there are no biological differences between it and the non-GMO salmon. So if you're trying to avoid GMO foods, you might not even know you're eating one. In 2015, a team of scientists from South Korea and China successfully created what they called double-muscled pigs by editing a single gene, the myostatin gene, or the MSTN, which naturally regulates muscle growth. By turning off this gene, they created these very jacked pigs. The goal is to have these pigs approved for human consumption, but that didn't end up happening. The idea is pretty straightforward. In theory, modify the genes to create meatier pigs and other animals like cows and goats. Sounds like a dream for the meat industry, but in practice things get a lot messier. When CRISPR is used to edit the genes, it's often done by first altering individual cells from the animal's skin, then using cloning techniques to turn these cells into embryos. The cloning process can create a lot of problems. For example, in China, out of 900 genetically engineered pig embryos, only 8 survived with the desired genetic changes. Many of the piglets that did survive were born with severe health problems, like thickened tongues, and many didn't make it past their first few months. GMO mosquitoes. These little critters are designed to help fight diseases like malaria, but like with everything on this list, there is some controversy here as well. One of the big selling points of GMO mosquitoes is their potential to reduce populations of disease-carrying mosquitoes over time. The idea is to release genetically modified male mosquitoes that are designed to outcompete wild males for mates. The offspring of these matings won't survive to adulthood, gradually lowering the mosquito population that carries diseases. Field tests have shown that these GMO mosquitoes don't appear to have any major impact on humans. They're engineered to target specific mosquito species, which means the risks to other species or humans seems minimal. Another advantage is that introducing GMO mosquitoes doesn't involve pesticides. This is a big one for those concerned about harmful chemicals being released into the environment. Now, on the flip side, these modified insects could carry or even develop unknown pathogens that might be harmful to humans. There's also criticism that not enough long-term testing has been done to understand their full impact. There's also a fear that these GMO mosquitoes might mutate into a form that could reproduce, which could create a new set of problems. This last one is quite dubious. The flying umbuku lizard. So the story goes that scientists in Zimbabwe managed to unlock a dormant genetic trait in the umbuku lizard, a small, rare reptile supposedly native to Africa. The lizard is believed to be a descendant of the pterodactyl, the prehistoric flying reptile. So these scientists were able to reawaken a flying strand of DNA that had lain dormant for millions of years. And the result, it created the flying umbuku lizard. To date, apparently, only 6 of these flying lizards have been produced, and they're kept completely separate from the regular umbuku lizards, just to make sure there's no crossbreeding between the genetically modified lizards and the non-modified ones.
Starting off this list in our number 10 spot, we have the two-headed calf. In the aftermath of the Chernobyl disaster, the exclusion zone became a breeding ground for some of the most bizarre and terrifying animal mutations in history. One of the most unsettling discoveries was the birth of a two-headed calf. Farmers near Chernobyl were stunned when they witnessed an animal with not one, but 2 fully formed heads and underdeveloped limbs, a grotesque reminder of the disaster's enduring legacy. Scientists immediately linked this horrifying mutation to the intense radiation that not only killed life in the area, but also twisted the very DNA of surviving species. As the impact of radiation altered the fetal development of these animals, this calf's survival became a tragic symbol of how nature was forced to adapt in the face of devastation. Over time, chilling photos of the two-headed calf circulated, serving as a haunting visual of the unseen toll the disaster took on the natural world, forever etching this mutation into Chernobyl's dark and twisted history. The disturbing sight of this calf is just one of the many strange and horrifying mutations found in the zone, proof that Chernobyl's legacy is still alive in the most startling and unnerving ways. Next, we are talking about the glowing spiders. Deep in the eerie forests of Chernobyl, something straight out of a horror movie is happening. Spiders, those creepy creatures we're already wary of, started crafting glowing webs in the radioactive wastelands. But this isn't just some freakish mutation, it's an odd twist of nature's ability to adapt. The radioactive particles creeping through the area have infiltrated these arachnids, altering the very makeup of their silk and causing it to glow under UV light like a neon sign of doom. It's both chilling and amazing at the same time, a very bizarre, fluorescent testament to how radiation doesn't just destroy, it rewires every part of the environment. Despite the terrifying look of these glowing webs, the spiders seem to be thriving, proving once again that life in Chernobyl might be twisted beyond recognition, but it's certainly not backing down. Next, we are talking about the gigantic catfish of the Pripyat River. No one cruising along the Pripyat River expects to come face to face with freshwater behemoths that could dwarf a grown adult, but that's exactly what lurks beneath these murky waters. Catfish measuring a jaw-dropping 9 feet or more have become a bizarre local legend, their enormous shadows drifting beneath the submerged ruins of old docks and tangled reeds. The strange truth is that these giants aren't sporting visible mutations like extra fins or gnarled faces. What's unsettling is the sheer scale of their growth. Without normal predators around, and with radioactive contaminants subtly affecting their environment, these fish have been free to balloon to unbelievable proportions. They've essentially taken full advantage of their strange new world, transforming from ordinary river dwellers dwellers into something that feels more at home in a monster movie. Such extremes of size raise uneasy questions about what the radiation may be doing to the entire food chain and how nature warps when left to wander uncharted territory. Next, we are talking about the albino moose. Nothing quite rattles the senses like catching a glimpse of a massive snow-white moose quietly stepping through the abandoned woodlands around Chernobyl. With their unusual earthy browns seemingly washed out, these pale giants cut ghostly silhouettes against broken fences and crumbling buildings. Scientists believe this unnatural albinism is directly tied to radiation tinkering with the genes that produce skin and fur pigment. What makes these eerie creatures so unsettling is how easily they blend into the Fallout's strange new normal. Towering figures that have adapted to become haunting, colorless symbols of the region's invisible scars. Each measured step through the underbrush feels like a chilling reminder that even the toughest inhabitants of this land have been reshaped in ways that defy both logic and expectation. Next, we are talking about the birds with deformed beaks. There is something deeply unsettling about watching a tiny swallow struggle to pick up the simplest seed because its beak curves at an impossible angle. In Chernobyl's exclusion zone, researchers have reported sparrows and swallows sporting twisted, elongated beaks that look more like poorly bent wire than a sleek feeding tool. These deformities aren't just cosmetic, they can make it nearly impossible for birds to gather enough food, threatening their chances of survival. Scientists link these bizarre changes to genetic damages from lingering radiation, the same invisible force that's quietly reshaping the area's entire ecosystem. These deformed beaks aren't just a tragedy for the birds themselves, but a glaring symbol of how nature, when exposed to something as catastrophic as nuclear fallout, veers down a path it's not supposed to follow. At our number 5 spot and halfway mark, we have the eagles. The lynx isn't the only one making a huge comeback. The mighty white-tailed eagles, endangered across much of Europe, are making quite the appearance in Chernobyl. These birds, perched atop abandoned watchtowers, add to the ghostly atmosphere of the exclusion zone. While their populations are growing, which is great, they are not immune to radiation's effects. Researchers have found tumors, beak deformities, and lower fertility rates in some of the zone's 249 bird species. Yet, the eagles still continue to flourish, reclaiming a land stripped of human interference but still full of invisible dangers. Next, we are talking about mutated spiders. Spiders are bad enough when they're normal. Mutated spiders are the stuff of nightmares. The spiders of Chernobyl's red forest are spinning webs that seem straight out of a horror movie. Their webs are oddly shaped, with chaotic patterns suggesting some very mysterious genetic mutations at play, and even more disturbing, these webs are radioactive themselves, laced with particles that have settled into the environment over decades. The spiders and their prey live and die in these toxic traps, creating a macabre cycle of contamination that illustrates how deeply radiation has seeped into even the tiniest details of life in the zone. In our number 3 spot today, we are talking about bison. The hulking bison of Chernobyl's exclusion zone, weighing up to a staggering 2,200 pounds, are living symbols of nature's resilience, but also its vulnerabilities. These majestic creatures graze on vegetation laced with radioactive particles absorbed from the soil. Every mouthful of grass or bark adds to their radiation load as isotopes like cesium-137 and strontium-90 continue to circulate through the ecosystem decades after the disaster. Their sheer size and strength make them nearly invincible to predators, but radiation exposure has its own invisible consequences. Researchers have raised concerns about the long-term effects on their health and reproduction, including potential mutations, weakened immune systems, and shortened lifespans. Even more unsettling is the role these bison play in spreading the contamination. As they roam through the exclusion zone, their movements redistribute radioactive particles. Despite the risks, like many of the other animals, the bison have found a strange kind of sanctuary in this human-free wilderness. Their numbers are growing, and conservationists cautiously monitor their progress, marveling at how one of Europe's rarest animals has adapted to an environment hostile to most life forms. Next, we are talking about invertebrates. From one of the largest largest animals to some of the smallest, beneath the soil of Chernobyl's forests, the tiny creatures are waging a quiet battle for survival. Populations of bumblebees, butterflies, and grasshoppers have plummeted in areas with high radiation. The radioactive soil, saturated with cesium-137 and strontium-90, interferes with their ability to lay viable eggs, cutting off future generations. These losses ripple up the food chain, affecting everything from birds to small mammals. Invertebrates' decline is a reminder that radiation's most devastating impacts often begin with the smallest players in an ecosystem. And finally, to end off this list, in our number 1 spot, we are talking about fungi. For this one, we are heading right inside the heart of the reactor itself, the place where this all really started. Deep within the reactor's ruins, black fungi cling to life on the walls of the destroyed core itself. Species like Cryptococcus neoformans and Cladosporium don't just survive radiation, they actually use it as an energy source. Researchers have discovered that these fungi contain melanin, a pigment that absorbs ionizing radiation and turns it into chemical energy, much like plants use sunlight in photosynthesis. This ability, dubbed radiotropism, is as unsettling as it is fascinating, raising questions about what other life forms might adapt to survive in similarly extreme conditions.
A two-headed brown trout was found in a creek in southern Idaho, and it wasn't the only deformed fish in the area. Scientists found more trout with facial deformities, twisted fins, and defective eggs, and it all pointed to one thing: selenium pollution. Selenium is a metal that shows up naturally in the environment, but when it builds up from things like mining or coal burning, it becomes toxic. In this case, the pollution was traced back to operations run by J.R. Simplot, a massive agribusiness company that processes food and chemicals. They funded a study to look into the deformities, and while the report claimed that the selenium levels were safe, others strongly disagreed. Joseph Skoripa, a wildlife biologist with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, said the study was biased and, quote, highly questionable. He pointed out that it completely skipped over the effects on birds and reptiles and seriously downplayed the deformity rates in fish. Meanwhile, in Tennessee, politicians started pushing bills to deregulate selenium altogether. See, the coal industry has a stake in this too. What's happening in one Idaho creek is just one part of a much bigger picture. There's this fish called the Clear Lake hitch that only lives in Clear Lake, California, and some of them have developed a mutation known as pug-headedness, which you can probably form a pretty clear image of in your head. They end up with steep, almost boxy foreheads, bulging eyes, and an underdeveloped upper jaw. Basically, the top half of the mouth doesn't grow right, so it ends up shorter than the bottom, making the whole face look warped. Scientists think this is thanks to pollution, mainly from pesticides and mercury that have built up in the lake over time. The hitch used to be everywhere in this area. They were a big part of the diet for indigenous tribes like the Pomo, and back in the day you could see massive runs every spring. These days, even in a good year, only a few thousand show up to spawn. Some years, barely any. Out in the middle of the Mojave Desert, there's this tiny, deep pool called Devil's Hole. It looks like just a weird blue hole in the ground surrounded by dry rocks, but it's actually a deep water-filled crack in the earth, kind of like a natural well. And inside this tiny pool lives one of the rarest fish in the world, the Devil's Hole pupfish. These fish are tiny, smaller than your pinky finger, and they've been living here for thousands of years. The water is warm, nearly 90 degrees, and has very little oxygen. The fish need that exact setup to survive. It's a very specific environment, but they've adapted perfectly. Until recently. Right now, there are only about 75 of these fish left, and scientists are worried. Their genes are a mess. Scientists have found what's called genetic load. Basically, these fish are drowning in bad DNA, and there's no way for natural selection to clean it out. This leads to what's called an extinction vortex, where the genetic problems make it even harder to survive. Back in the 70s, conservationists built backup tanks to protect the pupfish in case the wild ones died out. But at one of these tanks, some pupfish from a nearby but different species snuck in. Their babies mixed with the DNA and grew way faster and healthier, even sprouting extra fins. The hybrids exploded in number, which showed biologist Andy Martin that introducing new genes was probably the solution here. Martin thinks the devil's hole pupfish could be saved if they bring in a few of these cousins from a spring just a few miles away. But some conservationists hate this idea. To them, it's not really saving this specific species of fish if you're changing their DNA. Nanosilver. That sounds like an anime attack, but this is a real particle causing mutations in fish. Silver nanoparticles, tiny particles smaller than viruses, are used in over 200 consumer products because they kill bacteria on contact. Scientists are now worried these little particles might be messing with the environment and wildlife. When silver nanoparticles wash down drains, they end up in rivers, lakes. Darren Ferguson, a researcher at the University of Utah, tested these particles on zebrafish embryos in the lab and found some pretty scary mutations. Some of them became, quote, extremely distorted, almost making a number 9 or a comma instead of a linear fish, he said. The particles caused deformities in eyes, tails, and most disturbingly, their hearts. And here's something pretty scary. Zebrafish actually have organs kinda similar to ours, so this could hint at risks for people too. Scientists still don't know exactly what this means for us or the planet long term, but the Environmental Protection Agency said the same special properties that make nanoscale materials useful are also properties that may cause some nanoscale materials to pose potential risks. In California's Kesterson Reservoir, a big environmental problem popped up because of selenium pollution. Selenium is a naturally occurring element, but when it builds up too much, it becomes toxic. In Kesterson, the water got contaminated with high selenium levels, mainly from irrigation runoff. The fish there, especially embryos, started coming out with serious deformities. Some had messed up eyes or were just missing them completely. There were deformities in their fins, the brain. Scientists call this cluster of problems Kesterson syndrome. And it's not limited to fish because the birds eating them also suffered. Birds have been found with deformed beaks, legs, wings.
Next, we are talking about the black frogs. Out of all the strange and eerie changes in Chernobyl's exclusion zone, the sighting of pitch black frogs might be one of the most unsettling. Eastern tree frogs, once a vibrant green, now sport deep inky black skin, blending into the desolate landscape like shadows. This isn't just a freak accident, instead it's an eerie form of adaptation. Scientists believe that these frogs' dark skin acts as a natural shield, protecting them from the radiation still lingering in the soil and the air. By absorbing less harmful energy, their blackened color may give them a surprising survival edge in this nuclear-scarred environment. But while this adaptation could be seen as a victory for biology, it's also a reminder of just how deeply the forces of nature can alter life when pushed to the brink, forcing creatures to evolve in ways we can barely comprehend. In our number 4 spot today, we have the wolves with strange fur patterns. There's something jarring about locking eyes with a wolf whose coat looks as if it's been crudely repainted by nature's own shaky hand. Within Chernobyl's silent forests, some wolves now sport baffling fur patterns. Patches that never grew back, odd stripes where there should be solid gray, and splotches of color that defy any recognizable pattern. Scientists suspect that these peculiar coats hint at deeper, invisible changes within their DNA, possibly caused by the relentless radiation that seeped into every inch of their environment. What's truly surprising, though, is that the wolves aren't just surviving. They're actually thriving. In a world abandoned by humans, they've staked their claim as top predators, hunting in small packs and darting through ruined buildings like ghosts. Next, we are talking about the mutated wild boars. It's one thing to stumble across a wild boar in the forest, but discovering one with bizarrely shortened legs, an overgrown head, and tusks twisting at unnatural angles is another level entirely. In Chernobyl's exclusion zone, these heavy-set animals have soaked up a cocktail of radioactive isotopes, contaminating their bodies and warping their development in startling ways. Some boars appear top-heavy and clumsy, as if their own skeletons are struggling to keep pace with the genetic mischief unleashed by the fallout. While not every individual shows such blatant distortions, enough of them do to leave an unsettling impression. These creatures are shaped by an environment that continues to bend the rules. Each gnarled tusk and awkward awkward limb stands as a living reminder that radiation does not fade quietly. It leaves its fingerprint on every generation that must somehow learn to survive in its shadow. Next, we are talking about the insects without wings. It's hard to wrap your head around a butterfly that can't take flight, yet that's exactly what researchers are finding in Chernobyl's exclusion zone. Delicate creatures like butterflies and moths, once symbols of gentle transformation, now struggle with stunted wings that look half-grown or never form at all. Instead of fluttering gracefully over the tangled fields, some are left crawling on the ground, vulnerable and off balance. Scientists believe the radiation's relentless tinkering with genetic material disrupts critical stages of growth, leaving wings twisted or completely absent. It's an unsettling sight that strips these insects of their most defining feature. And finally, ending off this list today, we are talking about Przewalski's horse. These horses first originated in Mongolia and were wild horses that became endangered. They first became endangered due to hunters who would often kill the stallion, which of course would provide many difficulties in terms of reproduction. These horses also weren't doing very well in captivity, which made things even more difficult. This, combined with the harsh winters which would often claim their lives, left things looking quite grim for the species. In the late 1990s, however, in an effort to help repopulate these animals, 30 of them were released into the Ukrainian side of the exclusion zone, and it is believed that some of these original horses are actually still alive today, which is amazing, but camera trap images have also shown young horses and foals, which means they are repopulating, which is a huge win. They're expanding population in such a harsh environment, which could mean that they might potentially be able to return from the brink and go on to continue as a species, which is something we always want to see. Starting off this list today, we are talking about double-headed snakes. Ever been startled by nature's own glitch? Double-headed snakes are one of the most jaw-dropping examples of polycephaly, a condition where an embryo fails to fully split during development. These snakes emerge with two heads, each with its own set of instincts that can conflict with one another. Imagine one head wanting to attack while the other hesitates. This internal tug of war often leaves the creature struggling to feed or move properly, and while this phenomenon is most famously seen in snakes, it's also been spotted in turtles, lizards, and even birds. It's a wild reminder of how delicate and unpredictable nature can be. Next, we are talking about the cyclopic fish. What could go wrong with a fish's blueprint? Cyclopic fish with a single central eye instead of the usual pair are a startling example of developmental disruption. These mutations typically result from severe genetic errors or exposure to toxins during early growth stages, leaving the fish with a disorienting, almost cartoonish appearance. The lone eye is rarely enough for proper vision, making survival nearly impossible. Scientists study these rare cases to uncover the intricate signaling pathways involved in eye formation, turning what might seem like a gruesome anomaly into a key puzzle piece in understanding developmental biology. Next, we are talking about the amphibian limbs. Ever seen an amphibian that doesn't quite fit the mold? Frogs and salamanders sometimes hatch with extra, missing, or oddly deformed limbs due to genetic glitches or environmental disturbances like pollution and parasitic infections. These mutations don't just make for a bizarre appearance, they can severely impair an animal's ability to escape predators or forage for food. While these deformities might sound like something from a horror story, they also offer researchers invaluable insights into how environmental factors can disrupt the delicate process of limb development in nature. Next, we are talking about the ocular growths. What if a creature's eyes went rogue? In rare cases, amphibians are born with extra or misaligned eyes due to aberrant ocular growth. These malformed structures can throw off the creature's entire visual system, resulting in significant impairments that make it difficult to navigate or to hunt. Although such mutations are extremely uncommon, they provide scientists with a unique window into the complexities of eye development, revealing just how finely tuned and vulnerable these processes really are. Next, we are talking about the insect appendages. Ever noticed an insect that looks like it came with bonus parts? Sometimes genetic errors or environmental stressors cause insects to sprout extra wings, legs, or antennae, turning an ordinary bug into a walking, flying oddity. These extra appendages aren't superpowers. They tend to hinder the insect's ability to move, feed, and survive in the wild. Yet this bizarre twist of nature's offers entomologists a fascinating glimpse into how even minor disruptions in the genetic blueprint can lead to dramatic and unexpected changes in form and in function.
In Oneida Lake, New York, walleye fish started appearing with tumors. This comes from exposure to chlorinated wastewater effluent. That's water discharged from treatment plants containing chlorine byproducts. So these chemicals don't break down easily and can build up in the lake. These tumors are obviously a sign that pollution in the lakes has carcinogenic effects, meaning it can cause cancer. Walleye are especially important too because they're popular for fishing, so this is worrying not only scientists, but fishermen and the communities who depend on the lake. Back in the 70s, a coal-fired power plant in North Carolina started dumping wastewater full of selenium into Bellows Lake. Over time, it completely wrecked the fish population. By the early 2000s, the number of fish species in the lake dropped from 24 down to just 6. Most of the fish couldn't reproduce anymore. One study found that 19 of the original 20 species couldn't produce any surviving offspring. Only smaller fish that ate plankton, like mosquito fish, managed to stick around. They weren't affected as badly by the selenium buildup. Eventually, the plant stopped dumping the waste into the lake in 1986. Levels of selenium in the water dropped way down, and they even restocked the lake with sport fish like bass and bluegill. But even 10 years later, the fish were still having trouble reproducing. That's because selenium sinks to the lake bed and slowly leaks back into the food chain, especially if storms stir up the sediment. To make things even worse, some illegally introduced Alabama bass in 2011. They started outcompeting the native bass, especially largemouth. Now state officials are trying to get rid of them by removing catch limits, but the damage is already being done. In the Great Lakes, especially Lake Ontario and Lake Michigan, scientists have seen lake trout hatching with strange deformities. They found fish with weird faces, swollen yolk sacs, which are the little sacs attached to fish embryos that hold the nutrients they need to grow, and they have bloated areas around the heart, symptoms known as blue sac disease. It's caused by exposure to dioxins and toxic chemicals that build up in the water over years from things like industrial waste and pesticides. These toxins settle in the sediment but work their way up the food chain. Fish at the top, like lake trout, get hit hardest because they eat smaller, contaminated fish. The damage mostly shows up in the embryos, so it's affecting reproduction more than anything else. Many of the baby fish just don't survive. These deformities were first spotted decades ago and are still showing up in areas where dioxin levels are high. Even though regulations have cut down on the amount of dioxins going into the lakes, the old contamination is still there. Now, we've talked about all the bad stuff going on with fish, but what about some interesting adaptations? Well, Atlantic tomcod in the Hudson River developed a mutation that lets them survive in waters full of toxins. For decades, the river was basically a chemical dumping ground. Chemicals that usually kill or will seriously harm fish, but scientists have noticed that tomcod have developed a genetic mutation that changed how they process pollutants. Normally, these chemicals get into a fish's cells and start causing damage, but this mutation messes with the pathway the pollutants usually use. Instead, the fish store the toxins in their fat, basically locking them away where they can't cause a whole lot of harm. This trait didn't show up everywhere. It's specific to tomcod that live in polluted water. The downside, though, is that these fish are now heavily specialized to survive in dirty, polluted water. If the environment changes again, even if it's for the better, they might not adapt fast enough. And they're still concerned about predators eating them and taking in those same toxins up the food chain, including people who eat the fish. Killfish are tiny, colorful fish found along the East Coast, often in places no other fish would want to be, like New Jersey's Newark Bay or Virginia's Elizabeth River, where there's a lot of toxic waste. These areas are loaded with dioxins and heavy metals, but somehow killfish are doing pretty well, all things considered. Turns out they've evolved an insane resistance, up to 8,000 times more than normal. Researchers collected hundreds of killfish from different polluted sites and sequenced their genomes. And what they found was that each population had developed similar mutations in the same genes that basically turned off the normal response to these toxins. This kind of resistance is only possible because killfish have super high genetic diversity. For other species that don't have that kind of variation, adapting like this isn't really an option. Again though, there's still food for birds and bigger fish, so there's still a lot of worry as to how all that stored up pollution could affect the rest of the food chain. After the Chernobyl disaster, one of the first obvious signs of mutation was in the local bird populations. Researchers started noticing barn swallows with bright white patches, a condition called partial albinism, which is rare under normal circumstances. And along with the odd coloring though, some birds had twisted beaks, deformed toes, and strangely shaped tail feathers. These weren't just small defects either. Some of the beak deformities made it almost impossible for the birds to feed properly. According to studies published in journals like Biological Conservation, these mutations were especially common within the highly contaminated areas closest to the reactor. The birds' survival rates were much lower than normal too. A lot of the albino swallows didn't make it through their first year. Scientists figure the radiation damaged their DNA, leading to these visible abnormalities. Interestingly, the frequency of these mutations actually gives researchers clues about how dangerous certain areas still are today. High numbers of mutated swallows usually means higher residual radiation levels. Even now, generations later, you could still find birds around Chernobyl with unusual markings or growth defects. Inside Chernobyl, scientists discovered something totally unexpected. Some species of fungi show a phenomenon called radiotropism, where instead of growing toward light like normal plants, these fungi actually grow toward radioactive material. According to research shared by the National Institutes of Health, these fungi use melanin, the same pigment that gives human skin its color, to absorb radiation and turn it into energy. Almost like photosynthesis, but instead of using sunlight, they're using deadly gamma rays. So not only can these fungi handle huge doses of radiation that would kill most living things, they actually prefer it. Samples were even brought up to the International Space Station to see how they would react to cosmic radiation, and again, they were just fine. One of the eeriest sights in Chernobyl is the Red Forest, a place where pine trees absorbed so much radiation that they turned rusty red before dying. But some trees didn't just die, they mutated. According to the BBC, researchers noticed that a lot of pine trees developed strange needles. Instead of fanning out like normal, their needles were clumped together in these thick, tangled bunches. In some cases, the trees looked almost like natural bonsai, stunted, twisted, sometimes missing their tops completely. Normally, pines grow in a clean, upward pointing shape, but radiation damage scrambled their growth patterns. Mutations affected how cells divided and how these trees structured their branches and leaves. Some trees stayed abnormally small even decades later, others grew in these chaotic, knotted shapes. Scientists say the Red Forest today is one of the most radioactive outdoor places on Earth, so it makes sense that the trees would be kinda messed up. While a lot of animals around Chernobyl died off after the meltdown, some species, like the bank vole, a small rodent, adapted pretty well. According to a study in Nature Communications, these rodents show clear signs of genetic damage. Their DNA has more breaks and mutations compared to voles living outside the zone. But instead of dying out, a lot of them have somehow developed to better repair their DNA. It's not that the radiation didn't mess them up, it absolutely did. Researchers just found evidence of abnormalities. What's crazy though is that these voles are still surviving in one of the most contaminated parts of the world. Some scientists think natural selection favored ones that could fix their damaged DNA better, allowing them to pass those traits on. Rotifers, microscopic animals that live in fresh water, have been studied in Chernobyl's contaminated ponds. According to Frontiers in Microbiology, researchers found that rotifers from the exclusion zone can survive much higher doses of radiation than ones outside it. Instead of just dying from DNA damage like you'd expect, these rotifers seem to have upgraded at a cellular level. They developed better systems of repairing their DNA, and possibly even in ways to protect it from radiation damage in the first place. Rotifers are already known for surviving crazy conditions like being frozen solid or dried out for years, but Chernobyl pushed them even further. These little guys adapted in a way that scientists are still trying to fully understand. And now, some researchers are looking into whether the rotifers' abilities could help humans or other animals deal with radiation better one day. Right after the Chernobyl explosion, researchers started noticing that insects were showing some changes. Beetles and grasshoppers with missing parts became pretty common. The worst mutations showed up in areas closest to the reactor, where radiation levels were just off the charts, of course. Insects would hatch with warped or missing body parts that made it almost impossible for them to survive. Wings would come out crumpled, antennae, which insects need to sense their environment, would be stubs or just completely gone. Some beetles had legs growing in the wrong places or extra limbs. Scientists were able to connect the number and severity of deformities directly to how much radiation the insects were exposed to. The first few years after the disaster saw the worst of it, obviously. Over time, the number of severe mutations dropped, mostly because the most damaged insects didn't survive to reproduce.
Next, we are talking about turtle shells. What if nature's armor wasn't built to last? Turtles and tortoises sometimes hatch with malformed shells, gaping, asymmetrical, or oddly contoured due to developmental mutations. Their shell is their primary defense against predators, and any flaw can leave them dangerously exposed to environmental hazards. Often linked to temperature fluctuations during embryonic development, these shell deformities are a stark reminder of how even slight changes in early conditions can have life-altering effects on the animal's survival. Next, we are talking about two-tailed lizards. Ever been intrigued by a lizard with an extra tail? Lizards are known for their impressive tail regeneration skills, but sometimes this process goes awry, resulting in a bifurcated or split tail. While a two-tailed lizard might seem like something out of a fantasy novel, the extra tail usually disrupts the creature's balance and coordination, making everyday survival a bit of a tougher challenge. Interestingly, this mutation isn't always permanent. It can be the result of incomplete regeneration following an injury, offering a quirky insight into nature's remarkable yet imperfect repair mechanisms. From turtle shells, we are now talking about crab shells. What happens when a crab's armor becomes a bit of a burden? Exposure to pollutants or random genetic anomalies can cause crabs to develop grotesquely misshapen exoskeletons. These abnormal growths not only distort the crab's appearance, but also impede its movement and feeding abilities, turning it into an easy target for predators. Despite the grim reality for the affected crabs, studying these mutations helps marine biologists understand the environmental pressures that can disrupt crustacean development and highlights the vulnerability of marine ecosystems to external stressors. Next, we are talking about bird wings. Ever wondered how a bird survives with uneven wings? Some birds hatch with asymmetrical wing development, where one wing is noticeably different in size or shape from the other. This imbalance can be catastrophic, severely limiting their ability to fly, evade predators, or compete for food. Often indicative of deeper developmental issues, such wing deformities serve as a harsh reminder that nature's precise engineering engineering isn't infallible. For the birds effective, even a small deviation in wing symmetry can mean the difference between survival and a life grounded by physical limitations. And finally, to end off this list, we are talking about blob plants. What if a plant's growth turned into a bizarre work of art? Fascination is a mutation where a plant's growing tip becomes elongated, flattened, or swollen, resulting in oddly blob-like structures that defy the usual natural symmetry. Though this mutation might produce a look that's almost otherworldly or a little bit grotesque, it provides scientists with unique insights into the genetic and environmental factors that influence plant development. Triggered by everything from genetic errors to infections or even physical damage, fascination challenges our expectations of natural beauty and reveals the unpredictable side of nature's creative process.
What you're looking at here is a frog affected by the radiation of Chernobyl. In 2016, two Spanish researchers, Pablo Barraco and German Oriozola, were studying how life was bouncing back in Pripyat, and they noticed something strange: black frogs. Now, obviously, dark-colored frogs on their own aren't unusual, but the type of frog they were looking at, Hyla orientalis, a tree frog native to the area, is usually bright green. So what happened? Well, it turns out it might be evolution caused by the radiation. The darker skin isn't random. These frogs have developed higher levels of melanin, the same pigment that protects human skin from UV damage. In this case, it helps block radiation from damaging the frog's cells. And it seems this shift happened fast. Within a few decades, a bright green species started turning dark to survive in a nuclear zone. It's one of the clearest examples of nature adapting. Instead of dying out, these frogs have adjusted their biology to deal with one of the harshest environments on the planet. This is Jeremy Wade, River Monsters guy, pulling a massive catfish out of one of the cooling ponds near the Chernobyl power plant. These ponds are still radioactive. Wade mentioned the fish he caught had radiation levels about 16 times higher than normal. But what really grabs attention is the size of these things. They're huge. People have wondered if radiation is causing these fish to mutate and grow into monsters, but it may not be the radiation that's making them giants. It's more about the environment. These ponds are closed off, meaning the catfish are at the top of the food chain. No predators, tons of food, and people even feed them sometimes, so over time they just get bigger and bigger. They're living longer as well, which adds to their size. Now, that doesn't mean they're not being affected by the radiation. They're definitely soaking it in, and scientists are still studying whether there are long-term mutations or effects we can't see from the outside. Either way though, these catfish are a real reminder of how life can keep going in places where it really shouldn't. Wolves in Chernobyl aren't just surviving, they might actually be evolving. In 2014, Dr. Kara Love and her team from Princeton headed to the exclusion zone and put GPS collars on several wolves to track them. These collars didn't just show where the wolves were going, they also measured radiation exposure in real time. The wolves were getting hit with radiation levels up to 6 times the legal safety limit for humans every single day. That should be deadly, but instead of dying off, the wolves seem to be adapting. BLOOD samples showed changes in their immune systems, almost like what you'd see in a person going through radiation therapy. Even more interesting, parts of their DNA looked like they were evolving to resist cancer. In a place where cancer risk should be through the roof, these wolves are developing ways to fight it. Now, because of the situation in Ukraine and obvious safety concerns, the research is slowed down, but if what they've actually found holds up, these wolves might be the key to understanding how to survive in high radiation environments. Because we all want to do that, right? Maybe even how to treat cancer in humans one day. Now that we definitely want. Wild boars in the Chernobyl exclusion zone are basically radiation sponges. Out of the animals still hanging around, these guys are carrying some of the highest levels of radioactive material in their bodies, and it all comes down to what they eat. Boars dig through the soil looking for roots, insects, and mushrooms, especially deer truffles. And those truffles are loaded with radiation because the soil around Chernobyl is still contaminated. So the boars eat, and the radiation builds up inside them. Over time, it's had some nasty effects. People have reported sightings of boars with strange growths, tumors, physical deformities. It's not like they're growing extra legs or anything out of a comic book, but their bodies clearly aren't doing great. Radiation messes with their cells and weakens their immune systems, making them more likely to get sick or develop weird internal issues. But even still, they are surviving. Maybe not as well as the dogs or wolves, but they've managed to reproduce and live in this environment. Some are even leaving the exclusion zone and mixing with boar populations in other parts of Europe, which is kind of concerning. So this may not be a living thing, but considering it's a glob of radioactive goo, I mean, I don't know, maybe it is. It's known as the elephant's foot, one of the most famous concoctions to come out of the Chernobyl disaster. After Reactor 4 blew up, a bunch of nuclear fuel, metal and concrete fused together under the plant and cooled into this massive lump of radioactive material, and it kinda looked like a deformed elephant's foot. Thus it was dubbed the elephant's foot. When this thing was first formed, it was putting out so much radiation that standing near it for just a few minutes could kill you. Not exaggerating. People who had to go near it in the early days of cleanup would get a lethal dose of radiation in minutes. One guy who filmed it back in the 80s was reportedly dead within a year. Even now, decades later, it's still dangerous. The radiation has cooled down a bit, but not enough to really make it safe. Scientists have kept an eye on it over the years because they were worried it might keep leaking radiation or start heating up again. It's also affected the air, water, and soil around it. They call the elephant's foot a kind of man-made lava, except instead of burning you, it poisons you. And yeah, it's still sitting there, deep under Reactor 4, slowly decaying, but still very dangerous. After the Chernobyl disaster, a group of wild Przewalski's horses, an endangered species, was introduced into the exclusion zone in the late 90s. These horses actually started doing pretty well in the abandoned human-free landscape, but not everything was normal. Researchers noticed that some of the horses were being born with these strange physical defects, like shortened, scruffy manes and unusually stubby tails. The deformities weren't as extreme as some other animals, but there was still a lot of concern about whether radiation exposure had messed with the horse's development. Normally, Przewalski's horses have thick, upright manes and long tails, which help protect them from insects and the elements, but these Chernobyl ones looked rougher. There's still debate about whether the radiation is the direct cause or if it's more about poor nutrition in the contaminated environment, but either way, the odd physical changes were real. Not everything in Chernobyl shrank or mutated into weird broken shapes. Some plants actually grew bigger. Certain species of moss, mushrooms, and ferns in the exclusion zone started showing signs of gigantism after the disaster. According to the Journal of Environmental Radioactivity, radiation seems to have messed with the genes that control how these plants grow. Instead of growing normally, some plants ended up with these oversized leaves or unusually thick stems. It's believed that the radiation disrupted the normal signals that tell plants when to stop growing, leading to these bizarre, almost monster-like versions. In some parts of the Red Forest, ferns grew much larger than expected, and certain mushrooms popped up freakishly big. Scientists think this is because mutations either removed natural growth limits or somehow activated dormant genetic traits. Of course, just because a plant is bigger though doesn't mean it's healthier. A lot of these oversized plants had heavy radioactive contamination. Research has shown that birds living in the most radioactive areas around Chernobyl had brains that were about 15% smaller than birds from clean areas. Researchers think that radiation exposure during development damaged cells in their brain, either killing them off or stopping them from forming properly. They found that younger birds had it worse than adults, meaning that radiation was having a serious effect during the earliest stages of life. And those birds with smaller brains, unsurprisingly, had lower survival rates. What you're looking at here is the only known photograph of a creature known as the blackbird of Chernobyl. In early April of 1986, people living around the Chernobyl nuclear power plant started reporting something strange. Witnesses described seeing this huge, dark creature, like a man, but without a head. It had massive wings and glowing red eyes. Locals started calling it the Blackbird of Chernobyl. Sightings of this thing kept piling up, right up until the morning of April 26th, when Reactor 4 exploded. That disaster unleashed a radioactive cloud that spread across parts of the Soviet Union, Europe, and North America. The area around Chernobyl was just devastated. Over 300,000 people had to evacuate, still considered the worst nuclear accident in human history. In the chaos after the explosion, though, Soviet helicopters dumped sand, lead, and other materials onto the burning reactor, trying to smother the fire. Firefighters, not realizing they were dealing with a radioactive inferno, rushed in, often without proper protection. A lot of them would die soon after the radiation poisoning, including Lieutenant Vladimir Pravik, who passed away just weeks later. But some of those firefighters who survived long enough to talk, well, they reported seeing this massive, dark, winged creature flying through the radioactive smoke above Reactor 4. After the meltdown, sightings of the Blackbird stopped completely. Some people believe that the Blackbird of Chernobyl was the same kind of entity as the Mothman, the creature seen in Point Pleasant, West Virginia, before the Silver Bridge collapsed in 1967. Both creatures had similar appearances, giant wings, red eyes, and in both cases, there were also reports of nightmares and strange, threatening phone calls before disaster struck. Another theory is that people might have actually been seeing a black stork, but the black stork only has a 6-foot wingspan, not 20. And that bird doesn't explain the terrifying dreams and phone calls that witnesses talked about. Whatever the blackbird really was, though, it hasn't been seen again since Chernobyl. Whether it's a warning, a bad omen, or just mass hysteria, no one really knows. But if it ever shows up again, history says something very bad might not be far behind.